I'd like to thank you all for being here. My name is Karen McIntosh, and I will be facilitating the Paths to Publication today. And I just want to remind those of you who are not familiar with Paths to Publication, we are a professional development workshop that focuses on various topics like writing and research and grants. And we invite distinguished guests to come share their expertise and insights in an effort to help us all move forward in our own research agendas and writing. Our workshop is hosted and supported by the Educational Leadership Research Center, directed by Dr. Irby, and Credella Dual Language Center, directed by Dr. Lara, as well as the Graduate Student Advisory Council. Our workshop does meet every second and fourth Thursday of the month at 10 o'clock during the normal semester. So during the month of May, we will only have one workshop, and that information will be on the beginning slide, which let me share with you now. So the way the format will work today is our speaker, who is Dr. Debra McKeown, we'll have about 45 minutes to have conversation and share her expertise. She and I have discussed formatting, and she will be willing to entertain questions and discussion throughout. She likes that conversational format. So feel free to ask questions as well as type your questions into the chat box, and then we'll make sure all of your questions get answered. We want this to be a learning opportunity for everybody. Again, we'd like to thank you all for attending. And what we will be doing is we are recording this, and we will be sharing this out to everybody who has signed up for this and previous publication workshops. So you'll be getting an email within the next couple of weeks. Again, thank you for taking time to join us today. So today I have the pleasure of introducing to you Dr. Debra McKeown. In 2018, she joined the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Culture after more than 5 years at Georgia State University, where she was an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Psychology and Special Education. She received her doctorate in special education from Vanderbilt University, where she trained under Drs. Karen Harris and Steve Graham. McKeown also has 10 years of classroom teaching in various settings, including charter, urban, and international schools. She currently conducts intervention research in the area of writing. Most of her work focuses on impoverished urban settings, where she works at both the teacher and student levels. She presents her work at national and international conferences and publishes in top-tier journals. She is currently a co-PI on a federal grant to demonstrate the efficacy of a writing intervention, combining teacher instruction and an intelligent tutor to improve writing outcomes for elementary age children. In addition to being highly published in top-tier journals, she is the current associate editor of the Journal of Early Intervention and serves on the editorial board for Learning Disabilities, Research, and Practice. So Dr. McKeown, thank you for being here. And I will stop sharing my screen so that you may share yours. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I know everyone is busy, so it's a pleasure to join together and see your lovely faces and talk about publishing. And today I want to focus in on a very specific point in time in the publication process, and that is receiving and responding to critical feedback, which is, of course, inevitable in the world of publishing. This is me. We all wear lots of hats, and I just want you to know that, there's a human being behind the academic, just like there is for you. And I like to see people's humanity in all of their 3 dimensions. You see that I have kids, and most importantly, I have a dog named Huck, who I love. You've seen or heard in my introduction that I have some education behind me. So in theory, I know a little something about what I speak of, although it's a single perspective, right? And so take that as just a single perspective and continue to talk to others about all of the aspects of publication, because all of us continue to learn and grow across time. Okay. So today we're going to talk just ever so briefly about the publication cycle, the structure and the content of feedback, in case you have not received feedback yet. If you're still in the early stages of publishing, I just want you to know what that looks like. And then we'll get into the managing emotions bit, and then how to respond in an appropriate manner. Okay, so that's what we'll be talking about today. Do feel free to interrupt me at any time. Just unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can put your questions into the chat, and I'm happy to engage in that way. Also, we have a lot of expertise out there in the audience, and so if you have something additional that you would like to share, or if you have a different perspective that would complicate our understanding of any of this, please feel free to jump in. As I said, I'm a single perspective. Okay? All right, let's get started. So the publication process works like this, right? So we have our research idea, and that research idea is informed by other works that have been published, right? We all stand on the shoulders of giants, and we're trying to address some hole in the literature with our own research. And then we go out and conduct our research, right? Just a simple process, just go do some research, and then write the manuscript. And then we submit the manuscript to some given journal that's been identified. The journal then sends it out, usually for blind peer review, because we're all submitting to journals that conduct blind peer review. The editor makes a decision. They send that decision letter to you, the author, and then you get published, right? Super easy. Today, we're going to hone in on just this last little bit here, which is the review process in publishing. The review process looks something like this, and the caveat is that these procedures can vary by journal and even by editor of the journal. So always check the most recent guidelines for the given journal to which you're submitting, and talk to others who have been published in the journal as well if you have questions about it. Additionally, you can write to the editor and ask questions. Okay, but generally speaking, this is how it works. The editor of the journal will look through every manuscript that's submitted and filter out those that are just not a fit. So, some journals don't accept commentary. They only publish research, for example. And so commentary would be filtered out. Or if there's a hard page limit for journals, then the editor will automatically reject manuscripts that are well over that page limit, for example. And each editor has their own procedures, but this sort of filtering at a very high level typically happens. And then whatever's left, the editor will assign to associate editors on the team. And it's the associate editor who requests reviewers for a given manuscript. And the associate editors usually are looking for reviewers who bring expertise that's a match to the content or the intervention being addressed in the manuscript, and or the population, and or the methodology. And so the associate editor wants to find matches for those things in the specific manuscript so that there's the best expertise to review the content of the manuscript. Typically, AEs are looking for 2 to 4 reviewers. The average is about 3 in most of the journals with which I'm familiar. Usually, they are required to also have at least 1 and maybe 2 editorial board members as part of that review team. The reviewers are then asked to review, and the reviewers then respond, and they can accept to review, or they can decline, or they can say that they're unavailable. And they also have an option to suggest an alternate reviewer. So just because a reviewer is asked doesn't mean that they have to review. Once a reviewer does accept, though, then they're going to read the manuscript. They're going to document the strengths of the manuscript as well as areas to improve. And then most journals ask the reviewer to make a recommendation. Not all. There are some journals that just ask for the sort of write-up, what's good, what needs to be improved. But most journals want reviewers to make a recommendation. And those recommendations are usually some combination of this list, where it's accept, revise and resubmit, or reject, or some variation thereof. And once the reviews come in, the associate editor will read the manuscript independently, read all of the reviews that are submitted, and then make a recommendation to the editor about publication or not publication. Generally speaking, associate editors aren't just counting votes. They are actually making an informed but independent decision about the manuscript. And as AE, a few times I have made a decision that is the opposite of what reviewers had wanted because they missed a fatal flaw in the study. It doesn't typically happen, it is not common, but it does happen sometimes. And I just want you to be aware of that. And so the associate editor makes the recommendation and the editor makes the final decision. Typically speaking, the editor will go along with whatever the AE had suggested. The editor's decision falls in line with that same series of decisions, the accept, the revise and resubmit, or the reject. Are there any questions thus far? Okay. So the structure of the feedback is typically some version of this. So the reviewer comments generally start with a thank you, like thank you for the opportunity to review this manuscript. And oftentimes they'll give just an ever so brief summary of the study, 1 to 2 sentences. That just shows that they're talking about this particular manuscript, your manuscript, and that they read it. And then that's usually followed by a recommendation. And then finally, the issues to address. And those issues to address, it's up to the reviewer how to structure it. Typically, it's either separated into major issues and then minor issues, or it's in sequential order of the manuscript where they share issues with the introduction and then the present study and the method, the results of the discussion, and like follows that structure. Then the editor's decision or the AE's decision basically follows the same thing. So they thank you for submitting your manuscript to them. They offer a brief summary of the study. And in their decision letter, they're going to say something about the reviewers. So we invited 3 reviewers with expertise in this content area and methodology. 2 reviewers suggested to accept, and 1 reviewer said revise and resubmit. Their major concerns were, and here is my decision. And then the specific justification for the decision will be following that. And then any directions to the authors, unless it's a reject. If it's a reject, then it just signs off. And, you know, we hope that this does not deter you from submitting to our journal in the future. But if it's any other decision, then you're going to have directions from the editor about what to do. That is followed by a thank you with some encouragement. And then the reviewer's comments, usually just paste it in there. You know, like the raw data from the reviewers is provided for you to then address. And that is usually the structure of the feedback that you receive. The feedback can be a little hard to receive though. So let's take a look at how to just sort of interpret those words. If you get a letter back that says accept, yay. If it's accept with minor revisions or a revise and resubmit with minor revisions, yay, you're probably getting published, right? With little to no additional work. And typically, like in my world, minor revisions usually means, less than 5 hours worth of work. It's not precise, it varies by journal, it varies by editor, but it's not a lot of work if you have minor revisions, and it's usually small things. That's excellent news. But if you get a decision that's accept with major revisions, yay, I mean, it's accepted. You just have a lot more work to do, but that's still good. If it's revise and resubmit with major revisions or reject with the option to resubmit, you still have a very good chance of getting published. It's just going to take a lot more work than maybe what you had hoped. And let me take a moment to say this, reject with the option to resubmit. Not all journals do this, but it's kind of a nice, I think, tool for editors to have because it frees the authors to take their manuscript somewhere else and not resubmit it to the same journal if you decide that you don't want to do the work to resubmit. So it sort of frees you to make a different decision, because as long as your manuscript is under revision with a journal, you can't submit it anywhere else. So not all journals have that as an option, but some do. But it's handy, I think. If the letter says reject, and all of us have received reject, I think, don't worry. There's still a really good chance of getting published. You just have to identify a more suitable journal, that's all. Typical recommendations that are included, it spans depending on the study, but having issues with the introduction is really common. Almost every review that I get back from my reviewers as AE includes something about the introduction not being up to date, or isn't directly related to the research questions, or contains extraneous information. So the literature review, that introduction, is really important to address, and it's very common to see comments about that. The methodology, always issues there, either with reporting or not including some quality indicator. And so that's pretty common to see. Having the discussion or the implication section go beyond the scope of the data, that's pretty common. And then of course, APA issues. Nearly every review contains issues with APA. I want you to know that reviewers will most likely spend more time giving feedback on manuscripts that they want to recommend for revise and resubmit. Right? If it's revise and resubmit, they want to see it through to publication. So those decisions will oftentimes contain a lot more feedback. So it's not equivalent to the red ink on the paper from your high school teacher, where the more red ink, the worse the paper. That's not the case here. The more time that was spent giving feedback on your manuscript, the more the reviewers likely believe in the manuscript. So it's a good thing. If they're likely to reject the manuscript, they're probably going to spend a lot less time giving feedback. And you should also know that it's pretty infrequent to accept without having any revisions at all. It happens sometimes, and I know people who have had that happen too. I have had that happen only once, and on a very, very short paper. It happens, it just doesn't happen often. It's sort of like once in a career kind of situation. Although some people have had it happen a couple of times, it's just not common. All right, so who are these reviewers? They are not created equal. I can tell you that. So we're going to talk about the good, the neutral, and reviewer 2. Most reviewers, truly most, I mean a very large majority of reviewers will be excellent. They are invested in your science. They are invested in you being published. They see value in the work, and they really want to be helpful to improve the science, to maintain the quality of the journal that they're serving, and also to make sure that good work gets out there, you know, for the betterment of the field. We need to listen to those reviewers and their suggestions. And it can sting sometimes. It can be embarrassing sometimes, but it's going to help us grow. Oftentimes, these are folks who have very strong expertise on the field. They're oftentimes widely published. They have something important to say. This should help us grow. It should help us grow as researchers, as scientists, as authors, as thinkers. So that feedback it's good. Oftentimes critical, oftentimes really hard to read about ourselves, but it's good. It will help us grow. I just want you to know that stronger journals, the more top tier journals, oftentimes do have stronger academics on their boards and also in their reviewer databases. And so a little pro tip is that even if you don't think that your paper is quite good enough, if your study wasn't as strong as you would expect to see in those top tier journals, it could be that you send it out for the reviews, not expecting to get published, but just getting really high quality feedback on the manuscript so that you can make it better and then submit it to your target journal. It's not something that you should do often. It's certainly not something that you should do always. We shouldn't be abusive to the system. But there are some special studies where that is sometimes helpful to get that feedback. And you never know, it could hit. So sometimes it's worth just taking the chance. That's most reviewers. Some reviewers will have good intentions, but they just don't have the skill set really to give that high level critical feedback. Sometimes these are junior doc students or a reviewer who accepts to review the manuscript, but actually they end up not having expertise in the methodology or in the population or something like that. And I mean, that happens. And we should listen to those suggestions, but we should just also know that, well, you know, not everyone has expertise in all the things. Sometimes these reviews are mostly fluff though, or address minor edits. Like they just want to talk about your comma usage or the flow of your sentences or things like that. They can be helpful though, because they can tell us that something isn't quite readable or something doesn't quite make sense. And that's helpful as an author because we want our work to be readable to a wide audience. And so those kinds of comments can help us improve our writing across time. So don't dismiss these reviewers altogether. And then finally, it's a minority, but some reviewers are just in a bad mood. And they write with all kinds of snark, and it's hard to read. So we just have to read those reviews with thick skin, focus on what they do have to say to improve the research or the science or the writing, again with a thick skin, and just be happy that you're not as unhappy as they clearly are. And then you have reviewers who seem not to read, or they don't read carefully, or don't comprehend what it is that they're reading. These reviews are filled with requests to include something in the manuscript that's already there, or to remove something from the manuscript that's not actually there. Oftentimes they just can't believe that you haven't cited some specific researcher or research team. It's probably them who they're wanting you to cite, right? But there can be helpful gems even in these reviews that help us make our ideas a little bit more clear. So search in those reviews for the particular suggestions that can be helpful. This reviewer, we call reviewer 2. And reviewer 2 is a real thing, so much so that there are memes all over the web about reviewer 2. And most of us have a run-in with reviewer 2 on a regular basis. I just talked to 2 colleagues yesterday who was like, I have a reviewer 2. Oh. All right. Now we're going to transition into managing our emotions. Are there any questions though? Let me put your faces up on my screen so I can see. Do you have questions so far?
There is a question in the chat.
Okay.
Says, what skills do we need in order to become a reviewer for a journal? And how can we develop those skills as a PhD student?
Oh, that's a great question. So let me stop sharing for just a moment so I can talk to you face to face. So the skills that you need to become a reviewer for a journal is that you need to have some expertise in methodology. So you need to know some methodology, whatever methodology it is that you've chosen, or more than one. You need to have expertise in that methodology. And so if you're a quant person, you know, really pay attention to your quant classes and do the work so that you have some knowledge of that. If you're a qual person, you know, same. If you're a mixed methods person or a single case design person, know your methodology because methodology is key to the publication of research-based studies. Not that everything that's submitted is a research study, but you need to have some methodology. And then you need practice reviewing. So whoever your advisor is reviewing for journals. And so you can ask to review with them, because as reviewers, we're allowed to invite a doc student to guest review with us, and you'll get credit on your CV for doing it. And during that process of working with your advisor to guest review, they will model for you how to go about thinking through the review process, how we read a paper analytically, and then structure the review and write up the letter and the whole process. That should happen. And if your advisor isn't one who often reviews for journals, then you can reach out to other folks who do. I have offered opportunities for lots of doc students to review with me. And it's a hand-holding sort of guidance, and we do that a couple of times. And then once you are practiced and feel like you can do this independently, then we can recommend for you to be a guest reviewer on journals where, you know, any of us have connections at. So that's the procedure. It's scaffolded instruction, just like we do across education. It's no different for this, but those opportunities are definitely out there. So I would ask your advisor and ask other people in your department if you can guest review with them and learn the procedure. Was that helpful? Very good.
Yes.
All right. All right, let me go back. If you have any more questions, do feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or type it in the chat. I welcome that. All right, so managing our emotions. Look, the reality is that none of us like to be critiqued, right? It's not like we all go out there and say bad things about my work, beat me up. Like, nobody likes that. But expert feedback really does improve writing. Like, we have the research that says it. It's uncomfortable for sure, but it works. And you just have to remember that it's not about you. It's about making the science better. And you are in service to the science. So we have to frame it that way. And remember that praise makes us feel good. Everybody needs praise, but critique is what makes us better. I'm going to leave that up there for a moment so you can take it in and burn it into your mind. Critical feedback, it's not personal. And so the reviews that you get back on your manuscripts, it's not personal, but it is individualized. And because it's individualized to your manuscript, it can feel personal. But the reviews will always be focused on developing a skill set and improving the science, or the reporting of the science. I've never read a review that was attacking the authors. It was always about the science or the reporting of the science. And the fact is that academic writing and academic reporting, designing research, conducting studies, documenting procedures, analyzing data, reporting data, all of these are skills. It's not some innate talent that we're born with to do this. It's skills that can be developed with practice and with expert feedback. And so it's that feedback loop that helps improve our skills in these areas. And so we get better with time if we're open to receiving that critical feedback. And while you're going through the process of receiving this critical feedback, you have to maintain your own sense of self and remember that you're worthy as a person, that you are trained well, that you're going to improve with practice. But you have to open yourself up to the feedback. And this is that growth mindset that we try to teach our students to have, that with effort, we will improve. With feedback, we will improve. All right. Now let's talk about the actual process. Here's what we do. This is why you showed up today. How to receive a decision letter, okay? The very first thing, you get your letter, it's usually emailed these days, and you see the, the from in your inbox, and you open the email. Except I don't want you to open the email if you're having a really rough day. Like if you are already saturated, you're already overwhelmed, we're not going to open that email that day. we're going to wait until tomorrow. It's delayed gratification, I know, but we need to be in the headspace, okay? And the first time we read it, we're going to read it at arm's length. We are going to read it like we do the headlines on magazines standing at the checkout line at the grocery store, right? Disinterested, it's just kind of there. We're not internalizing anything. We're just sort of passing over it, okay? Sort of a disinterested look. That's how we're going to read this letter the first time, okay? If it's accept, yay, celebrate. Congratulations. No more work to do. You are published. Whoop. If it's any other decision, we're going to move on to step 2. And step 2 is just set it aside. I like to give myself about 2 weeks, but if you don't have that kind of time, that's okay. Set it aside for 2 days. And I know some of you are real go-getters and you just want to get on with the work. Okay, but if you're having some emotions about it, you really have to set it aside. Time is the healer of all things, including some hurt feelings or some shame or some anger that we might feel about the critique that we've received. Addressing this manuscript that we spent months creating based on research that took years to finish. So if we're having emotions about it, we're just going to put it in a drawer for a little bit of time. Once that happens, we're going to feel the feelings. While it's in the drawer, we're going to feel the feelings. We're going to acknowledge those feelings. We're going to go through the cycle of grief if we need to. We're going to do whatever we need to do to vent and work out those emotions. Always remembering that we are worthy and our worth is not the same as our work, and that you're enough just as you are. Your worth does not rest on being published. You're loved no matter what. And you're going to love yourself no matter what. We're going to work through those emotions. Once the time has passed, then we're going to make a plan. So this is where we're acting. You're going to make a plan to address the feedback objectively without emotion. And we're going to focus on the problems that are identified. Now, reviewers will oftentimes offer a solution. If they're going to say, change this word to that word, add a comma here, okay, like maybe we just accept their solutions. But sometimes they'll offer a solution that's a little bit broader, and you don't have to accept their way of solving the problem. You can solve the problems in your own way. So focus on the issues that they've identified, and then think about how best to address them. If revisions are requested, you're going to create a table with all the requested revisions, and I'm going to show you an example of that. And you can organize it in any way that you want. You'll assign the requested revisions to co-authors. If you're writing with others, you don't have to do them all by yourself. And because of the theory and the research behind behavior momentum, that we start with something easy and it improves our motivation to do more complex tasks, I say address the easy things first. Plus, it feels good to just check off 5 or 10 things in like 15 minutes and get it done. That feels good. Then you'll move into tackling the lengthier or more complicated revisions that are being requested. In the table, you're going to record how you've addressed each of the revisions, because you'll then use that table to write your response letter to the editor saying how you have addressed these things. And I encourage you, you don't have to, but I encourage you to show gratitude and respect throughout. Here is an example of a table, and this is from my work, right? So this is based on reviews sent back to me on one of my manuscripts. And so over here in my table, I have the revision that was requested. And I had another column in here that's who it was assigned to. I just took that out for clarity. And then over here is our response to the revision that was requested. And this is the actual language that will be sent to the editor in the letter that we respond to. And I won't take the time to read all of this, and you'll have access to the slides if you wish. But address APA 7. It happened that this particular manuscript was submitted and then came APA 7 before we got the response back. And so it sort of crossed over from 6 to 7, and they said, we need to move it to 7. Okay. And this editor went through and actually made line edits for us for APA 7 changes, which was phenomenal. Most editors don't do that. And so we just thanked and acknowledged that was above and beyond. And then another request was, I don't like that this idea is in here, but the editor disagreed with the reviewer there. And so we said, well, we're going to stick with what the editor said. It meant that we didn't have to change anything. And then we have a question that said, this isn't clear to me. And so we went back and we tried to write it in a more clear manner and said, this is what we did. This is how we addressed this. And then a request for labeling. And we were confused by this. And so we just said that we were confused by this in a respectful manner. And then another clarification request. And then a request for revising something. So we said exactly how we addressed it so that each reviewer's requests are addressed. It shows how we addressed it. It's very clear. Sometimes in response, you can just say, thank you, that was helpful. We've done this. Sometimes you just try to ensure that the confusion doesn't persist. And so you say what you've done and you sort of explain why you did it that way to the reviewer. Or you can just, say it's been addressed, because you make a big deal about commas, reviewer 2, and there was only 1 missing, but it's done. Manage those emotions. Sometimes you may disagree with something that a reviewer asks you to do. And so you can respectfully and occasionally disagree and not make the change. But you need to explain why you're not making the change. And so these are some examples of times where we've disagreed. And you don't need to read all of them, but just know it happens, and you can respectfully decline to make the change, as long as you also respectfully explain why you decline to make the change. When you've made all of the requested revisions, your table is complete, you've made the changes, you've explained the changes that you've made or why you didn't make some certain change, then you're ready to resubmit. You're going to turn that table into a letter to the editor that summarizes the changes that were made. And you're going to copy the table into the letter so that the editor can see that you have indeed addressed all of the revisions that were requested. After you do that, I want you to reread the letter and be certain it all reads respectfully. I think that we should show gratitude for the time that people have invested in this work, but that's up to you. And the language that you use is up to you as well. Keep in mind that good research is publishable. It's publishable somewhere. If the work really does fill an important gap, if it's designed with integrity and with the quality indicators for the methodology in place, if it was conducted to a high degree of quality and integrity, if the manuscript was written to standard, if it was submitted to an appropriate journal, it's likely to get published somewhere. Okay, it may not be your first choice place, but it is likely to get published somewhere. It just can take time and can take a lot out of us. Keep in mind that the editors work for free. Nobody's getting an extra salary for this, to my knowledge, in our field. They may get a buyout or something, but they're not getting paid extra. The associate editors work for free, the reviewers work for free, and we're all exhausted. Every single one of us, you, me, everyone, we're all exhausted. We're all grinding. And these are high stakes situations, right? Because publications oftentimes mean jobs, promotion, tenure, right? So it creates high stress for everyone. But you have to keep your composure when you're communicating to and about the editors, the associate editors, the reviews, the journals, and just remain respectful at all times. And view those reviews as an opportunity to learn and grow. Keep that growth mindset at the center of your mind, and know your worth and know the worth of your work. Don't let that go. What questions do you have? What can I answer for you?
Thank you, Dr. McKeown. If anyone has questions, you feel free to unmute. Again, you can also write it in the chat.
Hi, my name is Cindy. I don't have a question. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for that one image you put up and kind of let us sit in for a minute, where it's like praise makes us, feel good, but critique makes you better. That really resonated with me, and it's something to remember. And I just appreciate the way that you helped us to really focus on not taking any kind of critique personally. I think that's hard. It's hard for me to do, just in general with writing, with anything, because we always want to do, the best work that we can. And so we take it very personal because we're emotionally tied, to what we do, especially I think in the social sciences and the research that we do, and working with, teachers and impacting students and children and so forth. So thank you for that.
Thank you for the feedback. I appreciate that. It's hard to stay objective and not take it personally, because yes, we are invested. We are also in the service industry, right? Like, we're people. So yeah, I think that we're extra sensitive human beings in the span of human beings. And it's hard not to take things personally, but just it's about the science, right? And we all want the science to be better. And sometimes the writing is just, it's not a fit for those reviewers of that particular journal. I just accept it with grace and know that it's going to make us better. It's hard though. I acknowledge that. Other questions or comments?
Okay, Dr. McKeown, I had a good one last week where I got reviews back from a COVID paper I wrote about teacher mental health during COVID. And I've been sitting with the journal for like 7 months, and suddenly it came back out of nowhere. And one of the reviewers said, I'd be really interested to see a section on how this has affected teachers post-COVID. And they wanted it back in 14 days. So I was trying to navigate, that was reviewer 2, right? Our good friend, reviewer 2. And I was trying to navigate how to explain we're still in the middle of a pandemic and this thing isn't quite over, so I'm not sure how to do post data. So, but I was going to ask you, how do you, reviewer 2 is the real sticky point that kind of often becomes if there's going to be a bone of contention on a paper, it's going to be with reviewer 2. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe how you navigate that respectfully? And I think the piece that I'm still a little bit nervous with my writing is saying I'm not going to make that change. I know the literature's good, the data's good, I know it's correct. As you said, I'm not including your paper. How do you navigate that respectfully, that it doesn't turn combative or now become some kind of power struggle of a more senior professor trying to tell you what the field is, as opposed to like listening to your research?
Right. So one of the memes out there is, I'm sorry, reviewer 2, that I didn't write my paper the way that you would have written it. Because that's oftentimes how it comes across from these reviewers, is like there are different ways to do things. And those reviewers sometimes think it can only be done this way because that's the way that I would have done it. And it can be tricky to navigate that. In your specific example, the whole post-COVID thing, I think I would, off the top of my head, probably say something like, the focus of this particular work was not post-COVID. it was, and like restate whatever your central theme was, or research question was. Therefore, a section addressing this topic would not be appropriate for concision. And I would probably cite, you know, an APA, you know, 2 point whatever for concision or some such. And just keep it really factual. When they say something like you should insert this thing, but you know that this thing is already here, and it happens a lot, my go-to response to something like that is, this information can be found on page blah, 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 line da, 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 da. But I have also addressed it in this place that the reviewer asked for it. And then I use the word for clarity. I use that phrase a lot, for clarity, or improved the clarity, which is sometimes for clarity, and sometimes it is for because reviewer 2 can't read. Like, that's what I say in my head. My little snark goes off in my head, but not in the response letter. And so for clarity is, you know, it's that Southern bless your heart sometimes, you know, it has multiple meanings.
Dr. McKeown, we do have a couple of questions. One is people would like access to the slides. One thing that I could do is save your slides as a PDF and email them out to those, because everybody here should be on our listserv because they had to register. If that is okay, it depends on how you'd like to handle that.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, yeah. The second question, and this is probably a question many of us have, says, is it possible to request to pull a submission if we feel it's taking too long? And if so, how would one go about pulling the submission? Oh, and prior to that, actually, the question was, how can we respectfully contact the editors if we feel the reviewing process is taking too long? My first journal took a year to decide. Is that normal? So I guess there's kind of two questions there.
Yeah. I'm going to answer you, okay? So just stick with me, but a little anecdote. My very first publication that I ever had was with a top tier journal, and it took 1.5 years to even get the initial decision. And that's because the editor's husband was really, really sick, like really, really sick. And because of that, the editorial duties just didn't get taken care of. They weren't handed off in a way that they probably should have been, you know, in hindsight. And that's not casting shade. That is a single example of all of us are real people with real lives, and things are complicated. And right now during COVID, it is so difficult to get reviews. It is difficult to get people to agree to review right now because every single one of us are on complete overload. And it's difficult, even if they do agree to review, to get those reviews back in a timely manner. Like, it's very common right now. So, you know, usually people are given 4 to 6 weeks to get a review done. That's kind of at least in my world, the general timeline. People are asking for 3 and 4 months to get a review back. We are just all on overload. And so because of that, everything is taking a little bit longer, probably a lot longer. Okay. So just know that right now, the timelines off the charts, longer than what they typically have ever been in the past. And it's because everyone is on overload and it's hard to get reviews. Pre-COVID, no, 1 year would not be normal. Despite my little anecdotal sharing of that timeline, it's not normal. You can write and ask for an estimate. It needs to be completely without judgment and completely without snark. It needs to be completely objective. Okay, and so the way that you do that is, I submitted my manuscript on X date. I have not received a response. Do you have an estimate as to when I might receive reviews or a decision? Something like that. And they may or may not be able to tell you because it all rests with the reviews. And once the associate editor gets the reviews back, they also get time to write that decision letter. It's not like they get the third review back and boom, they write the letter that day. They also have timeline. So can you pull a paper? Yes, you can write to editors and ask to pull the paper. And then they'll pull it back from reviewers. It's kind of a process, but editors do have a way to do it. If they already have a couple of reviews back, the editor might say, I already have a couple of reviews, I'm waiting on one more, would you like to wait it out? Or they might just pull the paper and say, okay, off with you. It is possible, I'm not saying that it would happen, but it is possible that it might leave a bad taste in an editor's mouth if you do that and it hasn't been a significant amount of time. I think everyone's going to understand if it's been over a year. Like, that's probably not reasonable. But if they have explanations for why it might be taking long, it may not be the best decision to do that, because, you know, it's a small field. Every one of us are in a small field, and everyone is connected, and we're all human, and we just need to operate, you know, with respect and integrity. That said, everyone also understands that you need X number of publications for promotion and for tenure and to get jobs and that sort of thing. It's not like, you know, we operate in a vacuum. Everybody knows that. So I don't have a clear-cut answer for you. You should definitely talk with your advisor. Oftentimes, advisors will know editors of journals and can give you specific advice about how to navigate some specific editor or some specific journal, and that would be a good go-to. But it's absolutely possible to respectfully write and inquire about timelines, and it's also possible to ask to have your article pulled.
Okay, we have another question. What is the difference between H index, I-10 index, and G index? What is a good H index required for an academic position?
Okay, so it's a good question, and I don't have these definitions memorized, but your I-10 is an article that has 10 or more citations. I think the H index is a little bit more complicated formula, but it also has to do with citations. And I don't know about the G index. H index, it varies from field to field as to what is good, and also with the position. So assistant obviously will have something lower than associate, lower than full. And the best way to sort of figure that out is to look at the indexes of people in your field and at your level, or at the level where you're applying for, at aspirational institutions. So take a look at what their indices are, and then you can offer a point of comparison. I will say I've never had the conversation in a hiring panel where we talk about the H index of anybody. It's not a conversation that I've ever had. Not to say that other folks haven't, but I've served on many hiring committees. I just led a hiring committee for 2 positions. This conversation never came up.
Dr. McKeown, is framed as potential for scholarly impact to something, isn't it? There's like a way that it's talked about, that your potential for impact.
Yes.
Karen, thank you for this information about the application. And I have a question about the word limit. All journals now really keen about the word limit, but after you get the revisions, I mean, after you get the review from the reviewers, sometimes your response make the paper lengthy a little bit, or going back, like exceeds the number of words. So after resubmitting the paper, how likely do you think it would be accepted if the number of words exceeds the number that's required by the journal?
This is such a great point to bring up, because nearly every set of reviews that come back say something like, include more detail about X, Y, and Z, and also shorten the length of the paper by 3 pages. And so it almost feels like a catch-22, but you really do have to do both. And that's because journals are managed by publishing companies, and the publishing company has a page limit because they're publishing actual journals. Unless you publish, online only, or online only sort of open source journals. And then the page limit doesn't typically matter. But for those journals that are still publishing in paper, the page limit's a real thing because they have a financial contract. So you have to do both. You have to both include more detail and cut information. And the decisions are grueling. I know. I am not a person who writes with concision. No matter what paper I write, it's well over 50 pages and I have to go back and cut 15 just for the initial submission. It's painful, it's awful, but it's a real thing that everyone has to deal with.
So we're nearing the end of our time. Do we have one last question for Dr. McKeown? We've had some great questions, and there's been a lot of positive comments as well about addressing emotions and providing memes to help get the points across that you were making. So your presentation has been very well received. Do we have any final questions?
I have one final question or a question. Thank you so much for your time and helping us, and I really enjoyed the humor in your slides. My question is there a recommendation for the number of articles or chapters that a grad student could or should have when they go on the market?
That is a great question. And I'm not going to give you some precise number because it depends on the field and it depends on where it is that they wish to go. If someone is aiming to go as a tenure track line at a Research One university, they probably should have a few data-based articles. If not published, then some version of publish, impress, and submitted. But it depends on where it is that they wish to go. The expectation in general for us is in the professoriate, right, at top tier universities is, 2 database articles a year and a little something else on the side. And so for doc students, we don't really expect for them to start publishing until, maybe their second, but probably 3rd year, and then into their 4th year. And so a couple, 3 would be my guess for top tier. Although, we have certainly seen that number fleshed out with non-data-based articles or chapters, and that can also be helpful.
Thank you.
All right, well, it looks like we are at time, and I would like to thank everybody for their attendance. I did just send a message that our next Paths to Publication will be on the topic of grant writing. And so that is something all of us can definitely use. Dr. Queck will be talking to us about that. Again, Dr. McKeown, thank you so much. It was a fabulous presentation. We've all feel very enlightened and informed now about this process, and we really appreciate your time. And she has put her email in the chat for you all, so if you need to email her or ask her additional questions, feel free to do that. And I will be sending out a PDF of the slides, hopefully later today.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, give her a round of applause, give her a reaction. Excellent, excellent job. Thanks again.
Thank you.
So Dr. McKeown, I don't know if you want to look at some of the comments made, but there were lots of very positive comments. So I didn't want to X out. I want you to be able to
Oh, that's nice.
Read those. And then if anybody else has.
If anyone left has questions, I'm happy to hang around and answer a question or two for you. All right, this was fun. I'm glad that it was helpful.
Yes, thank you. I knew when I got a sneak peek at the slides, I'm like, this is going to be entertaining and it's going to be very appropriate. I also think we don't often get, I don't guess I need to keep recording, but we don't often get the addressing of emotions and, you know, some of those things, because those are things that we all deal with. And a lot of times we really become burdened by that and realizing, you know, you just got to pick up your bootstraps and move on and, you know, just press on and realize that it is for growth. And so I think that was especially helpful probably to all of us, because, you know, that imposter syndrome is real.
It is.
Yeah. So thank you so much. All right. Anyone else that's still on have any questions or comments? Otherwise, we can let Dr. McKeown go. I'm sure everybody has a busy to-do list. All right. Thank you again. I'm ending the meeting.
Thank you, Dr. McKeown.
So welcome. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.